Literally anyone can do this.
Literally anyone can do this. Literally anyone can do this. Literally anyone can do this. Literally anyone can do this. Literally anyone can do this. Literally anyone can do this. Literally anyone can do this. There is no laptop. 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 There is no
Why howdy. If you enjoyed that performance that you just saw and you are not a musician, then you might be interested to know that you could have done just as good of a job as I did. And the reason for that is because I created this performance instrument out of these two devices for the sole purpose of being accessible to everyone. Every single button you press will either play a drum sound that is in time with the drum loops, or every single key you press will be in scale with the other one. And even if you sing into it or whistle into it or whatever you do, it will be in time and in tune with the rest of the music. If you are a musician or a synthesizer or music gear enthusiast, you'd probably be interested to know that all of the sounds and functionality exist right in this little brain here. Right after I made the Mod Duo X video, the folks from Mod Devices pretty much challenged me to push this thing as far as it could possibly go while it was still in beta. And initially I thought, okay, I'm gonna make some crazy 17 operator FM patch, but that's actually kind of boring. I think what's actually more of a push is to make an accessible instrument that non-musicians can play and have it actually sound like a decent track. Now, the shinier thing that you see in this video is the Novation Launchpad X, and I actually bought it for the sole purpose of this video as it's just an accessible grid interface that you usually hook up with a desktop computer, but it also works with the Mod Duo X, as you can see. I actually would have been much more comfortable using something like an Arturia key step because I'm a musician and it has keys. It also has a sequencer, or even an old MIDI controller floating around my house somewhere. But again, my goal was not to make a performance instrument that I personally was comfortable with. It was to make one that anybody would be comfortable with. So a bunch of pretty light up buttons it is. All right, so I have to be 100% honest here. When I first thought of using the Mod Duo X as the brains for an all-in-one performance instrument, I thought to myself that it would just be a really fun project to work on for a day. And then once I started actually drawing out how it would work and planning things, I was like, there's no way that the Mod Duo X is going to be able to handle it. Like any device in the world, this has CPU and memory limits. And I figured that by the time I got to my second instrument, it would start spiking. But honestly, after some optimization, I never got past 2/3 of the processor power. All right, enough yapping. I'm going to show you how this thing works. So the way that I set this up is that the controls on the Mod Duo X, the knobs and the buttons, act as if it is a mixer. So they just basically turn things up and down, sends up and down, and mute certain instruments. The Launchpad X is actually the performance instrument itself. And so this bottom row, for example, is chords. The top row is the direction of the filter. This makes, essentially, it controls a couple things that makes the sound fuller. We can turn that down over here. And then this is the LFO speed, but one thing that I want to note before that is that the harder I press one of these buttons, the faster the virtual knob turns. The softer I press one of these buttons, the slower it turns. Okay, so this is LFO speed. It's always synced to 100 BPM in some way. Even if it's a triplet, it's 100 BPM. And so if I play the drums, which are these blue guys over here, then it's always in the beat. The second row of this with the dim, ugly gray buttons is actually a lead synthesizer. And it is bound to a variation of the D Lydian scale. I think it's missing a C because I want everything to always work with these two different sets of chords on this bottom. So you can never play a wrong note. Okay, so I plugged in this abysmal Behringer microphone, and if I press this button, I get to sort of a utility page where I can just enable mic pass-through to test levels and stuff. So let's try that. All right, it works. I have these two glitchers here that do pretty much what they sound. Let me turn on a loop here so we can just hear our tempo. And now, so that can actually work quite well with the looper. And I'm going to turn some shimmer up, and then I'm just going to play a chord. And now the bass is actually going to sidechain that chord. Oh, and I should mention, everything is auto-tuned. 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 If I'm getting annoyed by these loops, like you probably are, then I can just turn them off by pressing the buttons. They turn pink again. If I want to reset the loops and clear them, I can just press it 3 times or 2 times, depending on, if it's lit up or not. Finally, these are the drum loops. They're always in time together. And then this is a little reverb send for that. And then this little drum pad, again, is quantized to a 16th. And I think that's all there is to it. Finally, a couple of these buttons. This disables auto-tune. This disables the loop echo. This disables the lead reverb. And this disables the side chaining. This is the main chord reverb. This is the shimmer amount on the main chord reverb. This is the tone of the main chord reverb. And then over in this one, I think I just have mic pass through. I could turn the glitchers on or off. Again, that's more just for tuning things up before making a performance. And then I have a master output. This is actually sort of the master limiter. And then there's a master output up here as well that is part of the Mod Duo X. And that is the whole patch. But how does it work? So as fun of an instrument as this is, let's very briefly talk about how you can make one yourself. If you are the owner of a Mod Duo, or if you're from the future and you have a Mod Duo X, then this probably looks how you imagined it would. It's pretty chaotic. And while I sort of pull these apart and make it a little bit easier on the eyes and easier to understand what's going on, I should probably mention that whenever you're making an ambitious patch, or a patch that has a lot of functionality, a good idea is to draw things out. For example, when I first had the idea of this performance instrument, I found it a lot easier to just make a rough sketch of what I wanted to accomplish with it. And that way, when I went into this mod interface, it was much easier to organize the functionality and find out what was going to be harder than I thought it would be to accomplish, what is going to be easier than I thought it would be to accomplish, and then what I could accomplish that maybe I didn't think I could accomplish in the first place. So then when I had an early alpha, I could make another sketch that sort of listed improvements, maybe some bugs, things like that, and then that actually could be brought back into the mod interface and rinse and repeat. So this advice is actually something that comes from coding and video game development and things like that. If you were to program a robot to open a door with a lower level language, you wouldn't be able to just type in open a door and have it do that. You would actually have to map out what needs to happen. The arm needs to move closer to the door until it senses the handle, then it needs to grip the handle, then it needs to turn left, then it needs to pull, then it needs to let go after, so you get my point. Okay, so very briefly, I'm going to bring up the Novation Components app, which is how you make custom interfaces for the Launchpad X. So down here, this is where my chords are, right? I just brought in MIDI notes. This is C3, it's momentary, it's channel 1. Now the second row, it's sort of the same situation, it's just a bunch of random MIDI notes. It's just channel 2, they're a different color. Over here we have control changes, these trigger the drum loops. Over here we have more control changes, these trigger the loops. Over here we have virtual knobs. And then over here we just have a note bank for the drums. And I believe this is another control change for the effects. Okay, so how this works. Right off the bat, everything coming into MIDI is being quantized into a 16th note. And then it gets split up into different channels. Channel 1 is this first row. And that first row is these C major chords, or things that fit into the C major scale. And if I turn this off, we just have the raw notes, okay? Channel 8 is over here on the right side, and these are the D major ones. So both of these channels ran up into a MIDI monophonic legato and then into the chord machines, and that way these aren't going to play at the same time. That way nothing gets jumbled up and we're always playing one chord at a time and it doesn't sound completely crazy. The actual virtual synthesizer playing the chords is TAL Noisemaker. You could see the little rate moving. You could see maybe you could see some of the knobs moving. So I assigned those all within here. And it's a little messy, but it wasn't too hard. So things like the LFO speed and the cutoff and stuff like that, I assigned in here. And anything that's lit up purple here, you can see that that's where it was assigned to the Launchpad or to the Mod Duo X, depending on its functionality. Then that goes into Shiro, which is a really nice sounding reverb. And Shiro, the chords going through the Shiro then go into a stereo gain. That stereo gain then goes into a beta version of a CAF sidechain compressor. It looks really boring here, but all the controls are within this menu, just the interface hasn't really been made yet. And then that goes into a master gain, which goes into the output. So those are our chords. So then the lead gets filtered to channel 2 just to keep things organized, and then The soft synth actually making the lead is this Nick D AM synth, which is a pretty capable synthesizer. And as you can see, a couple things are bound to different knobs and stuff like that. The lead synth goes into the lead synth verb over here. It goes into a tal verb, which can be turned on and off with this here button. And then the tal verb wraps around over here to just a little gain knob, and then that goes up into the sidechain compressor. All right. Okay, so the vocals or looper microphone or input one or whatever you want to call it, that's pretty interesting. That goes into a gain that's cranked all the way up because I was using a cheap dynamic microphone. That goes in through an auto tune on manual mode, but it can also take in MIDI from these chord builders that we're sending to our chords. The MIDI basically got split into these two places. That goes out into a parametric EQ. I'm not using the parametric EQ yet, it's still here, so whatever I said about optimizing this, I clearly didn't do a good job. That goes into a looper. These looping buttons are controlled by MIDI CC buttons here in the pink on the launch pad. The MIDI looper goes out into an avocado stutter glitch ×2. Each one has basically different timings that work with the 100 BPM session. That goes out into a delay pedal here, a stereo echo that can be turned on and off here on this interface. And then that goes into just a normal volume thing, and then into the sidechain compressor and out into the output. Okay, so now things are going to get a little weird. These are our 3 sequencers, and they all come together. And if I press this button, I can play this one, for example, and then I could press the other 2 and play the other 2. So I'm going to press play, and I'm just going to actually program a new small drum pattern. And the reason I'm going to do a new one is just to show you how that works, because I already had a preloaded one. Okay, great. So that can just be our cymbals. This one looks like it's already playing, but you have to wait till that red light's on. And I'm just going to have a clap here. Okay, now this one is the more tricky one. This is our kick drum, and this kick drum is actually not going to the same drum piece. It's going to a 808, and that 808 is going into the sidechain input of the compressor, which sort of brings the whole mix together. So let's program some of that and press the little button to start it. That's really loud. And this kit over here is actually a full 808 if I wanted it to be. So really, if you wanted to do a laptop set as well, you probably could. So if you're not super familiar with this sort of node-based patching, initially this probably looked really chaotic and intimidating. But now you can see that it's actually just a bunch of common sense. And it's actually not all that difficult. I'm going to put a link to this patch in the description, and if you happen to be a Mod Duo X and Launchpad X owner, then feel free to perform around the world with it after the pandemic's over. I think that without that much tweaking, this would work with a Launchpad Pro or an old school Launchpad or a much cheaper and smaller Launchpad Mini. And really this would work with any MIDI controller as long as you changed and tweaked the messages just so it knows what it's triggering. Hey, if you enjoyed this video or if you learned anything, subscribe to my channel. If there's anything you want me to cover in the future, let me know in the comments. And as always, if you want to support this channel, I have like 25 hours of music available on Bandcamp and a bunch of social media links as well. They're all in the description. Bye.